Welcome back to the 2 Months Podcast presented by Boston Pizza South Common here in Edmonton. I'm your host, Joshua Marshall, and we have a guest waiting in the wing. This is his first time ever joining us. Maybe people thought this would never happen. I don't know, but we have the voice of the Edmonton Oilers joining us early this morning on Sunday. We have Jack Michaels. Jack, how's it going?
Well, not too early. I mean,
Not too too
10 a.m. by my standards is increasingly later in the morning than it used to be. I think 20 years ago it would have been early in the morning, but sadly, as I recede into the depths of the aging process, it seems to be more and more of a mid to late morning for me.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that because I work in BC for my day job, so we're up at 4 in the morning getting ready to do construction work. So so your body gets used to that even when I'm on a week off. So I hear you there. This does not seem too bad.
Comfortable. It's a
Exactly.
comfortable morning time. We'll put it to you that way.
Exactly. No, and first off, before we get into everything, Jack, obviously, we connected the other day, and you and Gene and Ryan came up to meet Ethan Freeborn, and I know that's a story you've been following throughout the hockey season, but I just want to get a quick thought on, the smile that you saw on Ethan's face, his mother's face, and his brother's face, and then the friends that he had at that morning skate the other day on Thursday, and just how part of the game that you do and in terms of that in that position, giving back and taking time to have that connection does definitely means a lot in the community as well, doesn't it, Jack?
Well, I mean, I don't really look at it as giving it back. I mean, that's just humanity. Like, I don't think it's like me, doing anything. I mean, I think that's just, being a human being and living in Edmonton and supporting one of our own. Ethan is a young man who actually played against my son last year in league play, and so they were competitors at one point, and obviously, for me, the biggest relief, not that I didn't think he had it before, but it was nice to see his support network in person. And that really kind of pumped me up a little bit to know that he's got so many loving people around him. His girlfriend was there, the one you didn't mention, but then, like you said, a ton of friends, his brother, his mother. I mean, he's got a lot of people who love him right around him, and I think that's the biggest thing that probably gets you through a situation like that. First of all, I can't begin to relate on what he's going through with an injury that has left him, for now at least, paralyzed, and especially for a young athlete, there's so much trauma involved, psychologically as well as physically, and to see his support network so captivated by his energy, that was the biggest thing for me. Is I just felt, I don't know whether I don't know whether I made Ethan feel better. I
Yeah.
mean, that I don't know how my presence could really make him feel better. I think as long as I didn't make him feel worse, that was a win for me. But for me, I walked away feeling better because he's got a ton of energy. He made me feel good, and his support network gathered around him made me feel about as good as you can in that process. So it was a real uplifting day for me. I don't know. I would be pretty presumptuous to think that my presence could lift anyone's day, but his presence certainly lifted mine.
Yeah, very well said. I know Tyler Freeborn, his brother, said, "'Cause I don't know if I'm ever going to wash my hand because I got to shake Jack Michael's hand." So it's kind of nice that way. But yeah, it's just a great support. Chris is a caregiver at the Stollery, who's been there for 25 years. Uh,
Yeah, of course he knew Gene. I mean, the other thing is I've learned that I've got to visit people separately from Gene, because if I have a connection with him, and in this case it was my son having played against him last year when they were in Tier One together, but it's immediately swallowed up by the immense network that Gene Principe possesses, and as you know, Josh, there's a reason he has that network. I don't know whether I've ever met as fine a human being as Gene Principe. He's someone that all of us kind of aspire. You talk about humanity. Uh, if you don't like Gene Principe, it's time to take a long, hard look in the mirror because that guy is as fine a human as I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, that's very well said too. Before we get to the Oilers stuff and the game last night, something you brought up in terms of when we were connecting with Ethan, yeah, on Thursday was minor hockey. We do a lot of minor hockey stuff on the podcast, and I thought you talked about something that was pretty cool in terms of your son and his friends starting a team and pretty much getting a good group of kids together and winning the city championship. And not necessarily have to go down the road of what's happening in club hockey. We all kind of see what's kind of going on there. There's been a lot of people, even the other day, Jack, thinking maybe 2, 3 years from now, club hockey might not even exist because what's going on. But more, I want to talk about the positive of how great that season was for your son and even you as a father seeing that in those kids because you seem pretty happy when you're talking about it and you have a big
I
smile.
was.
Yeah.
I was. It was a great experience. And I think it was the culmination. That team was a mixture of kids he had played with in hockey at various age groups. I mean, a couple of kids on that team he had played with in Timbits when he was 4 or 5. Then a couple of other kids he had played baseball as well as hockey with. And some of those kids had been, depending on the tier system, weaving in and out of his life, right? And they all seemed to conglomerate for his last year and to make that kind of run after losing in the city final in each of the previous 2 years was so much fun. And they lost in the provincials to Lacrete, as you might have heard me mention, but that didn't dampen what was a fabulous season. It wasn't so much about the winning, it was you know what? Like I knew you when I was 5 or 6, and now we're together when we're 17, and it was just a lot of fun, and it was all of them obviously are in their last couple of years of high school, so there's some pressures there, and it was nice not having a more demanding schedule that you might have at the club levels. And I'm not about to run down club at all, but I thought it was really nice, and it's interesting you bring this up, Josh, because I think sometimes you lose sight of what this is really supposed to be all about. It's such a fractional percentage that has any chance to get a university scholarship, let alone play in the National Hockey League. And I think it's another reminder that regardless of what level you're at, no one 20 years from now is, oh, was that house league? Like no one is going to remember that at all. And sometimes I hear parents say it with this air of derogatory nature, and I just it just kind of cracks me up because ultimately they're all going to end up in the same place, and that's hopefully having a successful career in life after hockey with a lot of fond memories and a lot of friends that were made during those formative hockey years that'll carry you through. I know that, I don't see my son that often. He's 18 and he's got a life of his own and he's first year of university. But what I do know is, despite the fact that I have definitely a revolving door at the front of my house with various kids coming through it, I do recognize a lot of his hockey teammates from years ago. So that's telling me that whatever experience that my son has, it wasn't diminished by the fact that he didn't play club hockey. It was enhanced by the fact that he made some great friends for the teams he did play for.
Yeah, it's what it's all about. It's those
Yeah.
connections, those genuine connections that turn into lifetime friendships and bonds
And
that
often business connections. I mean,
yeah,
the networking that goes along with that. My next door neighbor, played on defense when he was a kid with the head of a local bank in town, Josh. And that, I recently had my credit card compromised, and I was able to call that guy to get it straightened out based on the fact that my next door neighbor, who's older than I am, if you can believe that, played with this guy when they were growing up together. So again, it's amazing. Just like just in life in general, it's how you treat people when you're with them that ultimately ends up paying you forward years and years down the road.
yeah. No, it's very well spoken on that. Let's get to the game last night. Let's move to our Edmonton Oilers report sponsored by our friends at Shadified Salon and Barbershop. They got the 3 locations in Edmonton, and Mo Rahal takes care of most of the Oilers as well. So I know when they watch this on YouTube, Jack, I'm definitely going to get asked to bring Jack Michaels to Shadified to get taken care of. But you probably already
All
got
right.
the style.
I'll give them a shot. I'll
Okay.
give them a shot. They got a lot of work to do. As you
Yeah.
can see, there's only so much you can do. It's not much of a canvas that they're going to have to work on, but I'll let them give it a
Well,
shot.
if they can make me look good, they can make anything good. So, but they'll definitely want to take care of you there. I know that for sure. But a great game last night. I know on the way home, I was listening. If I was in Calgary last night working that game for our podcast, but I was listening to Rashog's podcast and Tom Gazzola, and just getting the fan scuttlebutt. I saw the first 40 minutes of the Oiler game, and I thought they played a pretty good game for the most part. I know it's that rival between Toronto, but what was your thoughts on the game, and is it right to kind of criticize maybe Skinner, because I think he's been played really good as of late. So I don't know if this one's a fault to him, but what was your thoughts on last night's performance?
Well, first of all, you've got to get on the 880 Ched post-game show because we got Rob Brown, and he's the best of the business.
Yeah,
Apologies to those two other guys. And Rashog was smart enough, at my suggestion, by the way, to bring Rob Brown into the mix. But having said that, and I mean that, I think Rob Brown is he is.
probably the
I
best in the
get to
business.
work with Rob and Louie, and they're the two best for me. They're the two best analysts that you could possibly hope for in the Western Conference. They're fabulous. Um, but I would say this: I don't think last night was too much about Skinner's goaltending. I think it was about Joseph Wall's goaltending. And granted, there was some leakage in the third period where it started to crack a little bit, but there he was again making a lunging, tremendous save at the horn on Corey Perry. He got a little lucky with a couple of posts in the final couple minutes, but it's hard to ignore the balance of his work. He had 45 saves. From Stuart Skinner's perspective, I mean, I'm not sure what Mitch Marner, just walking through people. I mean, I thought Edmonton, quite frankly, was a little leaky. You could point to rebound control, but then again, what goaltender's out there, controlling Austin Matthews, shot? I mean, in other words, that's the strength of Austin Matthews. Not only does he beat goaltenders, but he makes it difficult for anyone to stick a puck in his hip pocket after fielding a shot from Austin Matthews. The one he might, look at would be, I believe, the second goal, the rebound scored by Matthew Nyes. That was kind of a backhander 5-hole that maybe he'd like back. But you know what? As a goaltender, when you're playing the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Edmonton Oilers, you're going to face high quality chances. And I'm not going to lay that defeat at the feet of Stuart Skinner last night. The bottom line is Toronto had 2 power plays and converted them. Edmonton had 2 power plays and failed to convert either. The score of the game was 4-3. If the penalty kill holds the fort, you're looking at a 3-2 Oiler win. And that ultimately for me, in a close game, the first thing I look at is special teams. And I know there was a big disparity, and there's no doubt that Joseph Wall, on the whole, had a better night. But I would not say that Stuart Skinner played poorly last night against Toronto. Not at all.
Yeah, no, I didn't think so. From what I saw, I thought that he and his performance has been pretty good to date. And what's your thoughts? As I think it's like November 9th, this team really took a turn and turned
Right.
around and pretty much being one of the best, or if not the best team in the NHL. What was that in your point? What was that turning point that made that?
Goaltending and special teams. Goaltending and special teams. Stuart Skinner did not have a very good first month. And once he settled in, the whole team seemed to settle in around him. I mean, the penalty kill was 59% in the first month of the season. And, it's still not rated that highly, and it took a tumble last night. But the bottom line is the penalty kill has been up around 90% over that stretch. So special teams of goaltending have pushed Edmonton, into the spot they're currently at, which is, it's still a tie for first place in the Pacific Division. I mean, Vegas has struggled lately. Edmonton comes away with a 3-2-1 homestand, but Josh, in the two games the Oilers lost in regulation on that homestand, they outshot their opposition by 20. 34-14 against Washington, you lose 3-2. 48-28 against Toronto, you lose 4-3. So I don't quibble with Edmonton's homestand on the whole. I think, quite frankly, I'd take issue with some of the recent wins more than the losses, to be honest with you, because Edmonton has been there against the top flight opposition. I think the Oilers have done enough to get by in some of their recent victories. They haven't necessarily knocked it out of the park, but they've been just good enough. And that's also typical of a team that knows that the only results that ultimately matter and the only results that they're going to be judged upon this season are the ones that are going to come in late April, May, and June. So this is a team that has stabilized in terms of special teams and goaltending. It's really defended well and played well at 5-on-5 throughout the season. Even when they started 0-3 and 6-7-1, I think is where you were alluding to in terms of what their record has been since then. Their 5-on-5 play has always been pretty good, and if you get deeper into the analytics with the expected stuff, and that's the kind of stuff I think you know more about than I do or pay more attention to it, it's been solid all year long. Their 5-on-5 play, I think on the whole, has actually been better than it was last year, even though I personally believe this team still has some growth and maybe an addition or two to get to the level it was at last year. That's just my opinion, even though they have a better record.
Yeah, and we'll see with Evander Kane when he gets back. That addition will just be, not
Right.
not every
And
team.
and you know what? There's no guarantee he's going to be back for the regular season. I mean
Yeah,
that's the thing that I think a lot of us have to wrap our heads around is it's one thing to be on the ice and it's one thing to proclaim yourself ready to go, but there is a medical team and there is a staff that's going to ultimately determine that. And I don't quite I'm not, there all of a sudden there's 30 games left in the year.
yeah,
And Evander Kane is going to be challenged to play in the regular season, in my opinion. It is, to me, no better than a 50-50 proposition.
yeah. I think it's better to wait to the playoffs part in my eyes with him, because he'll be ready to go, and we have seen it in the past where players have missed the regular season, but we're able to be difference makers in the playoffs, and
The only thing I'd say to that, Josh, is if you, in a perfect world,
yeah,
if you had 10 games, I would not say it's better to wait because I would say better to indoctrinate himself in actual game competition. You're going to be playing some desperate teams down the stretch that are going to try to get in. So that'll help you get up to the game speed you need to be. But also just Evander Kane's a presence. And I think you want the locker room to have time to adjust all the components. You're probably going to add one or two players at the deadline. You're going to want Evander Kane in that mix as well. I think in a perfect world, and I know what you're saying. If there's a question, no doubt, maybe hold him out. But if there's not a question and he's ready to go, I think it's important that you have your mix kind of fully established before the playoffs start. I certainly think that, for instance, acquiring Matthias Ekholm when the Oilers did and having 15, 20 games to get him up and running, very important. And also a natural leader that Ekholm is to bring all that stuff into the room is as important in my mind as getting it on the ice. It's just having everyone together both on the road and at home, getting all those personalities meshed together. I think it's really important, especially with a veteran club.
yeah. I know, like, I think it was last night was Chad Drummond's 1,000th game with the Oilers. I think Leon Draisaitl put a story on his Instagram,
Yes, yeah, that's fantastic.
100%. And I say the part earlier just because I think it seems like around the league a lot of people talk about the sports science team, the medical team with the Oilers. It's one of the best, if not the best. Obviously, look at the facility they're in. Look what they have across the street. In terms of the gym and I think it's Archetype where the
Right.
guys can go
He's
work
got a
out.
heck of a vertical leap, that Chad Drummond.
He does.
He is an underrated rebounder in pickup basketball. He's not a big guy, but that guy has an unbelievable vertical.
That's amazing. Um, what's your thoughts? It's only two games. It's a small sample size, but John Klingberg, what is your overall thoughts of what you saw from him in these last two games?
Well, you see him snapping around at times. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously he's a puck mover. He's another guy that can, like Draisaitl and Bouchard, and we saw it from Nurse the other night when he set up Perry for the game winner. He can fire darts from the back end and get the play moving up ice. I think that's another example of a veteran guy that you want to get as many games under his belt as he can. And I think Edmonton, the timing on this has worked out where, he's going to be able to play a back to back next week and another game against Colorado would at least give him 5 games before another break where he's, sitting on the shelf for 2 weeks. And that is going to be a challenge for him. I mean, we're talking about a guy who hasn't played since November of 23. So it's been every bit of 14 months since he's played. So very important to get him a chunk of games before this 2 week break to at least get him closer to the speed. Because the one thing about the National Hockey League, and this is something you learn as you go on in this league, is the level of play in game 20 compared to opening night, and then the speed from game 40 to 20, game 60 to 40. It is amazing how the pace quickens as the season moves along. So very important for a guy who's been on the shelf for 14 months, even though he's a veteran, even though he's been an all-star in this league and a highly accomplished player. You're still playing catch up. So I think it's vital that Edmonton was able to get him a chunk of games before this break, because coming out of the break, that's going to be the push. And having said all that about ultimately this team is going to be judged on the games they play in April, May, and June. To set themselves up, I do sense there's a higher degree of importance and placed on where they finish. I think it's in the back of everyone on that roster's mind that had Game 7 be played at in Edmonton's venue as opposed to South Florida, there may have been a different outcome. So I think the Oilers are focused this year more so than in seasons past. I think they gave it a real strong run a couple years ago against Vegas and, lost out by a couple of points and then ended up losing to Vegas in the second round. And then I felt like they, in the back of their mind, they thought, well, maybe we expended too much energy going after that top spot. And last year they kind of cruised in and then regretted it when they lose game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. So I think this year it's more like 2 years ago where their focus is going to be finishing as high as humanly possible because they want as many extra home games. I think they feel the home ice advantage for Edmonton in particular is greater in the playoffs than not only the regular season, but greater in the playoffs than other teams around the league in the postseason.
Yeah, it's
If that makes any sense.
oh, it does. And you see it like you're doing the games and you're in that arena. It's look at what the Spit and Chicklets guys were part of in terms of when Biz and Witt were there and like they keep talking about that experience and
I
how
think the city is still talking about them being in town.
yeah. And
They left a lasting imprint on the city as well. So it goes both ways.
yeah, it was funny because Rory McIlroy was doing an interview the other day, and he said he picked up hockey this summer, and his team is the Edmonton Oilers. So he was big on what he saw from the Oilers fans, knowing that they didn't win, that they were that team that's going to win multiple cups. And we said it on the podcast before. I think this organization, with the Draisaitl contract extension, I think there's at least 2 to 3 cups to be had in that window of his extension, McDavid's extension.
Well, Josh, let's get one.
I
Let's
know. Let's definitely,
let's get one.
but you
Let's
know
get
how they,
one. I'll settle for one, and we'll kind of build from there.
yeah. But you understand, like the history of the
No,
game.
I know,
The
I know,
players
I
that
know what
they
you're saying.
drafted and developed in their organizations, the generation
Yeah.
of players, they often come out winning a Stanley Cup. It might not happen when we, as a fan or a broadcaster or an expert of the game, want to say it, but it often happens. And just we'll move over. We'll stick with the D theme. And I just one thing on Klingberg. I don't know if you have the answer to this. Would he be able to go down to the American Hockey League on a conditioning stint during that 2 week window, Jack, or is there?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have to look at that myself. I assume he's on a one-way deal.
Yeah.
So, you'd be subjecting him to, yeah,
Waivers. I know. Yeah, I just was
yeah.
wondering if it's, you do see some guys go down. Like I know Philip Myers,
Well, when you play 5 games though,
you probably
like
can't,
the
right?
injury standpoint is kind of that's taken out of the mix, right?
Yeah, that's right for sure. Let's stick with Bouchard here. Let's go to Bouchard. I was in when I was at the game last night in Calgary. I was talking to a Western Hockey League scout, and we were kind of watching the game together. And he's still very high on Bouchard, but he just thinks this break will be really good for him if he doesn't get selected to go to Team Canada. And he does also feel like maybe the weight of the contract or the expectations is on him. What are you seeing from Evan on a nightly basis? I know for some fans it's polarizing, but it's pretty hard to find a skill set of a defenseman that can get you 60 to 90 80 points in this league that on a nightly basis where I
Well,
know
everyone keeps talking about how Evan Bouchard is struggling, but he's still a top 10 defenseman in scoring. I
exactly.
believe he's got 15 points in his last 17 games. And, that's so he's like carving out a pretty decent year. He's on target for about 15 goals and what you'd probably say 15 goals and 65 points. I mean, that's still a pretty solid year for a D-man, especially when you consider that he's been snake bit on the power play. Doesn't have a power play goal all year long. And he's got an absolute cannon from the point. I'm not saying he's had his best year. I don't think he has. I think he's fought the puck a little bit at times. He's gotten some tough bounces that have led to, breakaways and 2-on-1s the other way. It seems like that puck, if it does have a bad bounce in it, it's finding Bouchard this year, defensively, whether it's a pinch or just a bobble or a whiff. I mean, he's had some tough moments with the puck, which is interesting considering his puck play is his greatest attribute as well. But having said all that, if an off year for Evan Bouchard is 15 goals and 65 points, how many other guys can say that in the league, honestly?
Mm-hmm.
That their off year is going to be there.
Yeah.
And that's where his year is going to be. And again, I mean, he's a plus player. I know the plus minus sometimes gets degraded a little bit, and I know certainly Matthias Ekholm deserves a ton of credit for Bouchard's prowess 5-on-5. But I still think this is a really good hockey player. And again, if this is the floor for him, I think most Oiler fans will take that all day. But I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
It has not been his best year. I'm not so sure it's the contract as much as I do think he definitely wanted a shot to play Four Nations. I think that's important to him. He played for the World Junior team in Canada. I think once you have an opportunity to play for Team Canada, you want to play for him as many times as possible, with the exception of the World Championships, because you
Yeah.
always want to be in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I think it would mean a lot to Evan Bouchard, and perhaps that pressure of knowing he's right there on the bubble, maybe the seventh guy or the eighth guy, and of course, still having an opportunity with Alex Petrangelo pulling out that I don't know whether it's pressure though, because we're also talking about a guy who's played in the Stanley Cup final and thrived, and who's played in a tight 7-game series against another Western Canadian team and outplayed the Norris Trophy winner. So I don't think Evan Bouchard, it's a pressure thing, but perhaps a conglomeration of things, contract, Four Nations, and the fact that, like everyone else, he's played a ton of hockey in the last 3 years. So there's been some tough moments in this regular season, but I think his cumulative statistics at the end of the year will reveal he's had a pretty decent season for a guy with quote unquote an off year.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tough skill set to emulate in terms of when you have it. It's a great skill set. And I think the future is bright for him, and we'll see where his next contract in lines with. But this team is going to be a fascinating team to keep an eye on and watch. And I think Stan's done a good job. I think Jeff's done a good job, and a lot of credit goes to Chris Knoblauch. We'll get a quick thought on him, and we'll just move over to some of the trade talk that's happened in terms of get your thoughts on what we've seen transpire in these last 2 weeks. But Chris Knoblauch and what he's been able to do, I know you have ton of respect. We had Gene on previously, and Todd was a good coach, and Jay was a good coach, and there's been a lot of good coaches come through here. But just that what Chris has been able to do in terms of pushing the right buttons. Where are you at with him and dealing with him on a daily basis as well?
Well, something with Chris is, sometimes it's the buttons he doesn't push. And I think he's an emotional fulcrum for this team. I think he was exactly what Edmonton needed when the Oilers were struggling at 2-9-1 and the change was made. I think Chris steadied the ship, and that's what he is. He was involved with the Edmonton Oilers Community Foundation poker night the other night, and I went over to the table and I said, "Boy, I would not want to be at this guy's table because his expression does not change." I grew up a fan of Bjorn Borg. And, Chris Knoblauch has the same level headed approach. You do not know whether the club is down 6-2 or up 6-2. And, that's a credit to Chris Knoblauch. He does manage to balance things out. He handles, personalities on the team. He handles personalities on his staff. I mean, he's got Paul Coffey on one end, Glenn Gulletson on the other. I mean, those are two pretty combustible coaches with great personalities. So Chris manages all that. I think he's a perfect head coach in the standpoint. He told me one thing. He goes, I learned early in my career that the team never responds positively when they sense you're rattled or emotionally out of control. So, I'm a naturally calm guy anyway. And so it was very natural for me to always be, kind of a steadying presence back there. And that enables players to feel like whatever the circumstances are, they're never out of their control.
Yeah.
They're never, whether it's, the vibe of 20,000 fans packed into a building with game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, or whether it's, opening night and, not a whole lot is on the line. I think the fact that Chris Knoblauch brings the same demeanor, especially for a veteran club who's probably been through the gamut of coaches throughout their careers, for them to look behind the bench and know that they've got a guy who's not going to let a moment overwhelm him is important because especially veteran players can see right through that. They can see if their coach is not in control. And ultimately, if you're a coach in that position, you lose a degree of respect with those veteran players. So I think, especially for an older team, it's important to have a guy that, like I said, is not going to let any occasion, game, situation overwhelm him to the point where he's no longer in control.
Yeah, and having that even kill on the bench definitely can be a good thing for you going forward as a player. Where maybe if you're panicking as a coach, maybe that might
Exactly.
move over to the players, but you stay even keel. We had just these crazy amount of trades here, Jack, and we can list them all, but we could be here forever because there's
Right.
many of them. But just your thoughts. I know Cody Cece, someone that you dealt with, and he just got traded yesterday. But with that trade, the Rantanen trade, what the Flames have done in Vancouver, as a fan of the game too, is it kind of cool to see? And what are your thoughts for some of these teams and making these moves well ahead of the trade deadline, which is in 5
Well, I wasn't sure whether we were going to talk about Luca because that might have been the biggest trade.
Yeah,
But that's, I suppose, another platform
yeah,
and for another time. I mean, and the reason I bring that up,
yeah,
there's a point. There's a point to me bringing that up. The NBA trade involving Luka Doncic and Anthony Davis, because honestly, the NHL has reminded me of the NBA lately. That is what is so captivating about the NBA. That's why they have tremendous fan support. Is you never know what's going to happen in that league. And the NHL and the other sports, quite frankly, have never been like that. There's not the seismic trades. I mean, you can go for years without seeing a real meaningful trade in the NHL and the NFL in particular. You really it there's maybe one every 5 years where you're like, whoa. And I mean, especially Mikko Rantanen. Jared Bednar, in my opinion, might be the best coach in the National Hockey League. And he is going to be put to the test because Mikko Rantanen was not only a vital player for that team, a 110-point player for that team, but he was a leader in that room. Yeah, I mean, he had every bit the stage presence that Nathan McKinnon and Gabe Landeskog does. I mean, he was a central figure to that locker room, and that is a foundation shaker. And especially with the news that the cap is going up so significantly, I'm sure there's some players on that team that are thinking, "What are we doing? We just traded away a foundational piece." Along the lines of a Leon Draisaitl. I mean, I'm sorry, but Mikko Rantanen is right there. He's probably a half peg below because he obviously doesn't have an Art Ross and Art Trophy, but he also has a Stanley Cup, and he's also put up some huge numbers and has proven to play with great players to the degree that Leon Draisaitl has. So that was the biggest one for me. I think Calgary, Craig Conroy said it best, a reward. And guy adding not only potentially key guys in your lineup, but key guys for years to come. And Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee, they are not on the back nine of their careers. Their best years may very well be in front of them. And I know Farabee's been banged up, but I think though that's a bit of a scene refresher for those two players. And certainly, I mean, they're talents. There was a reason where they were drafted, and obviously it wasn't working with Kuzmenko, and he just hasn't recaptured that first season where immediately it was under the radar. And sometimes guys have big seasons when their teams are out of a playoff. It's different when you have to produce when you're in the mix. Vancouver has totally reshaped their team. Not much of a return for JT Miller, but I'll tell you what, Marcus Pettersson is a heck of a defender. That's exactly what they needed on the back end because, as much as, Boston may have overpaid for Nikita Zadorov and, Ian Cole is a solid veteran guy. Those two guys are missed on the Vancouver back end. They absolutely needed Pettersson, and I love him.
Yeah.
I think number one, he's got an interesting nickname. Anyone called the Dragon, I'm instantly interested in. And he's got range. He's got a little jam to his game. He is rock solid. That's exactly what Vancouver needed. They've been short at least one D man all year long. So a good pull for the Canucks after a pretty mediocre return on the Miller trade, in my estimation.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll finish up on that, Jack. Appreciate the time you took this morning, and all the best in the next coming days, and obviously the rest of the season here and into the playoffs. And we'll try to get you back on before the playoffs start and get maybe do a little prediction show and see how that goes. But
I
again,
know how it'll go for me.
yeah,
Bet the opposite. I'm,
yeah,
I'm like George Costanza. Whatever I say, do whatever you think I think might sound logical. Do the opposite.
yeah. No, I hear you. I'm probably the
See,
same.
I already gave you a title for your next episode.
Episode 100%. So awesome. Thanks, Jack, and continued success too. You're great at what you do, and I don't know if there's anyone in the market that brings the enthusiasm as you do, especially down the stretch we go, as you say that. So it's
Well, I hope I did it at 10 o'clock in the morning. Like I said, it wasn't as early as it could have been. So
yeah,
hopefully I brought enough juice for 10 o'clock in the morning.
you always bring it. So thanks, buddy. Have a good one.
Cheers.